I know our text today is from Matthew 6, but all week long I've felt the Spirit leading me to tell the story of the Good Samaritan. A lawyer wanting to justify himself asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And Jesus replied, "There was a homeless man headed north on the F train to Manhattan. He'd been on the train many times before, performing as a busker who danced like the king of pop to earn a few dollars from passengers, trying to survive on the difficult streets of New York City. However, on this day, the man was too hungry, too thirsty, too sick to perform. In fact, he was so hungry and thirsty and sick, he didn't care about anything else anymore. He didn't care if he might go to jail or if he got a life sentence. He was looking for help. The man was so desperate for his basic human needs of food, water, shelter, and health care that nothing else seemed to matter that day. So he boarded the F train like he had so many times before, looking for help from his fellow human beings, and started asking some of the passengers if they could spare a few dollars so he could get something to eat or drink. But no one on the F train was willing to share. The man became frustrated at the indifference of his fellow passengers on the train, became agitated, and that's when he fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Well, that's not exactly what happened. He fell into the hands of a former Roman soldier who grabbed him, put him in a lethal chokehold, and went away, leaving him fully dead. Now, by chance, there happened to be other people on the train that day: Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, people of faith and good conscience. But none of them tried to help the homeless man. One person took out their phone and recorded what the Roman soldier was doing to the man, but the rest just looked on or walked right by. No one tried to help the man. Instead, a few people helped the Roman soldier by holding down the homeless man's hands so he could not fend off his attacker. Eventually, the police arrived and questioned the Roman soldier, but then promptly released him. Jordan Neely was that man lynched by a former Marine and his accomplices on the F train this past Monday. But there was no Good Samaritan there to help him. There was no one on the train moved with pity. No one who tried to assist him. No one who intervened to give him money or food or drink. No one there to help him get the care he needed. No one there to assist him. No one to bandage his wounds. No one there to provide him shelter or love. No one there to pour oil or wine on his body and his wounds. No one there to put him on their own animal and bring him into an inn or a hospital building. No one willing to give him even 2 denarii or even $2 so that the innkeeper might take care of him. No one to say, "Take care of this man, please, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever you spend on him." There were no neighbors on the F train. There was no Samaritan. There was no one willing to show Jordan Neely even an ounce of mercy. And so Jordan Neely's story is not the parable of the Good Samaritan, but the parable of the bad Americans. I know I'm supposed to be talking about stewardship this morning. I know I'm supposed to be inviting you further down the road to generosity. I know I'm supposed to be exegeting Matthew 6 right now. What's a preacher supposed to do when Jesus' words from the Gospel of Luke jump off of the screen, out of the pages of the New York Times, and smack me in the face? What am I supposed to do when the Word of God is reenacted in horrific alternative ending on the streets of New York City right before our eyes? What am I supposed to do when the Spirit shows me the inverse of the parable of the Good Samaritan in the murder of Jordan Neely on the F train on Monday? The Spirit will not allow me to say that this was just another day in America, or just another day on the streets of New York City, or just another murder on the subway, or just another black man lynched in plain sight. No, I'm afraid, and I can't pretend, and I won't pretend that this is normal or acceptable. I cannot ignore and will not ignore the story of Jordan Neely and the parable of the bad Americans. When protesters arrived at the Broadway Lafayette station, they chanted Jordan Neely's name. They chanted, "Black Lives Matter, Homeless Lives Matter, and Justice Now." But as I watched it, I noticed that somebody had taken a permanent marker. And on the white subway tiles, they wrote, "Who killed Jordan Neely?" Who killed Jordan Neely? We now know the name of the ex-Marine who choked Jordan Neely to death. But Daniel Penny is not the only one responsible for Jordan Neely's murder. And no, I'm not just talking about the people who held his hands down or the people who stood by and did nothing. Lack of housing killed Jordan Neely. Lack of health care killed Jordan Neely. Lack of food and water killed Jordan Neely. Lack of money killed Jordan Neely. The criminalization of the poor in this country killed Jordan Neely. Racism killed Jordan Neely. Apathy and indifference killed Jordan Neely. Greed killed Jordan Neely. We know the name of the man who murdered Jordan Neely, but the killers are still at large. The killers are still roaming around the streets of cities across America where poor and housing insecure and people struggling with mental health like Jordan Neely are being choked to death by injustice and inhumanity. It is Mental Health Awareness Month. But there was no awareness on the F train, only violence. What would have happened if just one person on that train was generous enough to give Jordan Neely $1 for some food or water? I don't know if you saw it, there was a woman who was interviewed by the New York Times. She said she'd seen Jordan on that same train just a few days earlier asking for money, and she gave him some. And he was so grateful, she said, he thanked her for 5 minutes straight. One single act of generosity could have saved this man's life. Jesus said, "Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, where thieves break in and steal. Store up for yourself treasures in heaven, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." We all know what it means to store up treasures for ourselves, but what did Jesus mean when he said, store up treasures in heaven? Treasures in heaven, it's a phrase that only appears once in the Gospel of Matthew. However, it shows up multiple times in the apocryphal books, Tobit and Syriac, and others that the Catholics still have in their Bibles, but that we took out. Those references there make it clear that when Jesus said, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, he meant very clearly from the tradition that we should stop keeping money for ourselves, but use our money the way God commanded and give money to the poor. Generosity to the poor, hungry, thirsty, homeless, sick. That's what Jesus believed meant to store up treasure in heaven. But something's happened to American generosity. Over the past 20 years, fewer and fewer Americans have been giving. In the year 2000, roughly 2/3 of American households gave to charitable organizations. But in 2018, a study from Indiana University found that that number had dropped to under half of American households. That means in that time period, 20 million Americans stopped giving. Scholars track this downward trend to the Great Recession in 2008. But in 2012, when many Americans experienced a partial or full recovery, our giving kept falling. American attitudes towards giving have changed. Americans are becoming less generous people. There's also research there that demonstrates that poor people are more generous than the rich. An analysis by the Chronicle of Philanthropy found that wealthier Americans give less of their income to charity while the poor gave more. Over the past 20 years, people who earned $200,000 or more gave progressively less to charity, while those who made less than $100,000 gave progressively more over that same period. And the poorest Americans, this is the craziest statistic, the poorest Americans earning $25,000 or less increased their giving the most by 17%. In the book American Generosity, sociologists at Notre Dame found that Americans living below the poverty line were far more likely than others to give more than 10% of their income to charity. That means that poor Jordan Neely was more likely to give money to the people who ignored and killed him on the F train than they were to give to him. Same is true here on the streets of the city of Charlotte as well. Scholars claim today that this decline in charitable giving is the result of the fact that Americans have become less religious and more secular. They believe this had the greatest impact on giving because generosity, giving to religion, has historically been the biggest way people give, the lion's share of charitable donations. The only problem is that a decline in Americans who participate in organized religion doesn't necessarily mean that there's been a decline in religious fervor. Americans aren't actually becoming less religious. We're just becoming religious about different things. Things outside of God and Jesus and the church. As organized religion in this country wanes, there has been what scholars call a migration of the holy to new objects of veneration. Americans are just as religious as we've always been, just as zealous as we've always been, worshiping just as fervently and feverishly as we've always been. There's just one difference. Money is what God used to be. The God of this country is wealth. The worship of the golden calf has returned in a new and ruthless guise in the idolatry of money, the dictatorship of an impersonal economy. Or in the words of philosopher Miguel Lewis, capitalism is our religion. Banks are churches. Bankers are priests. Wealth is heaven. Poverty is hell. Rich people are saints. Poor people are sinners. Commodities are blessings. And money is God. You know, the religion we confess is not always the same as the religion we practice. Fewer Americans might be at church, but we're still worshiping at the altar of the almighty dollar. In 1843, the great Scottish writer Thomas Carlyle wrote a treatise entitled The Gospel of Mammonism, where he sought to instill readers with the virtue of generosity. Carlyle told a grim story of a poor Irish widow and her 3 children who were forced to solicit help from the nonprofit charities in the city and were refused each time they attempted to get help. Carlyle wrote that at this charitable establishment and at that she was refused from one to the other, helped by none, until she had been exhausted by them all, until her strength and her heart failed. At each of the charities, the forlorn Irish widow appealed to her fellow creatures, her fellow human beings, saying, "Behold, I am sinking, bare of help. You must help me, for I am your sister, bone of your bone. One God made us. You must help me." And they all answered the same way. "No, impossible. You are no sister of ours." Eventually, Carlyle writes that the widow sank down in typhus fever and died. In the process of dying, she infected her entire neighborhood with fever. 17 other people died because of their unwillingness to get her help. This tragic story served as an example of how heartless and inhumane Carlyle believed society had become in 1843. The failure to help the widow was not due to inability, but refusal to care, unwillingness to care. And Carlyle saw that refusal in the face of obvious need as an affront to God, since it was God who made all people. The love of money, the worship of wealth, polarization of rich and poor made Carlyle ask this question: would it not have been wise and good for the people to help the poor widow? Would it not have been wise and good for the people on the F train to help Jordan Neely? Jesus said, no one can serve two masters. You will either hate one or love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. He said, you cannot serve God and mammon. You cannot serve God and wealth. You cannot serve God and money. This means we have a choice to make. A lot of Christians think that we can serve God and mammon at the same time. But Jesus clearly said here, no one can serve God and money at the same time. Because you can't have two masters. You'll hate one and love the other, despise one, be devoted to the other, cling to one and disregard the other. So Jesus said that when we think we can serve God and money at the same time, we're simply being self-deluded puppets of mammon. We're simply worshiping money and pretending that we're worshiping God. I know you've heard the lyrics from that famous 70s R&B song, money, 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 money. For the love of money by the OJs. Yes. For years, I love this song, and for years I thought that this song was a celebration of money, a valorization of money, the veneration of money. But the OJs, they sing something different. I was dead wrong. It's a warning about the evil power of money. The OJ sing, for the love of money, people will steal from their mother. For the love of money, people will rob their own brother. For the love of money, they sing, people can't even walk the streets because they never know who in the world will beat them up for that lean, mean, green, almighty dollar. People can't even ride the subway. But as I listened to this song again and again, the lyric that really hit me was, don't let money rule you. Don't let money fool you. A lot of us have been fooled by money. A lot of us have been fooled into thinking that money gives us freedom. That money has the power to save us. That money has the power to liberate us. But money, Jesus says, is a master. Money is an enslaver. Money is a ruler. Money doesn't want to free us, it wants to own us. Money wants to make us its servants. And so the only way to be liberated from the oppressive domination of the power of money is to give it away. And that's why we are inviting you. When we're inviting you down this road to generosity, to give, we're not just doing it so we can help the poor, or increase the good work that we do as a church in the world, or broaden the margins of this inclusive community of faith, or expand our cutting-edge programs, or take care of our incredible staff, or provide the funding necessary to maintain this beautiful facility. We're also asking for your sake. We're asking because we love you. We want to help you be spiritually healthy and whole. We're asking because we love you and we want you to follow Jesus. We're asking because we love you and we want you to be free from the master of money, liberated from the god of gold, delivered from the ruler of riches. We're inviting you to a journey down this road to generosity, because the more money you keep, the more power it has over your lives. We're inviting you to be generous because the act of giving is the only thing that helps put money in its proper place. We're inviting you to give because we care about your soul. And Jesus said, what does it profit a person to gain the whole world but forfeit their soul? When it comes to generosity, our souls are on the line. In Joshua 24, it says, choose this day who you will serve. We must choose. In Deuteronomy 30, it says, choose life so you and your descendants may live. We must choose. We can't serve God and money. We must choose. We can't serve God and riches. We must choose. We can't serve God and wealth. we must choose. We can't serve God and mammon, we must choose. This is what Jesus said. This is not me. This is what Jesus said. We cannot serve God and money, we must choose. We cannot serve God and greed, we must choose. We cannot serve God and the golden calf, we must choose. Jesus said, we must choose. I don't know about you, but I don't want to live in the parable of the bad Americans anymore. I don't want to live in the gospel of mammonism. No way. I don't want to live in a world where poor people can't take the F train and live to tell the story. I don't want to live in a world where a black man asks for food and water and everyone turns him away. I don't want to live in a world where the homeless and sick can't get the help that they need. I don't want to live in a world where the poor and marginalized are choked out in the streets and on the subway. I don't want to live in a world where greed is good, money is our master, and mammon is our God. I don't want to live in a world where everyone worships at the altar of the almighty dollar. I don't want to live in a world where we are slaves to money and then die. No way. I want to live in a generous world where people share what they have with others. I want to live in a generous world where people give to their neighbors freely. I want to live in a generous world where people take care of the poor and the marginalized. I want to live in a generous world where people know there's enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. I want to live in a generous world where people asking for help were never ignored or turned away or harmed simply for asking for help. I want to live in a generous world where people like the Irish widow and Jordan Neely always have food and water. I want to live in a world where they always have housing and health care. And I want to live in a generous world where every one of us also wants them to have health care and housing, food and water. I want to live in a generous world where people give their money to serve the rest of humanity. I want to live in a world where the idols of mammon are smashed into the building blocks of a new creation. I want to live in a generous world. What about you? What kind of world do you want to live in? What kind of story do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a generous world or a world of indifference? Do you want to live in the parable of the bad Americans or the parable of the Good Samaritan? Do you want to live in the story of mammon or the story of God? Which story will you choose? Jesus said we have to choose. We have to make a choice. Not choosing is still a choice. So choose this day who you will serve. Choose life so you and all our descendants can truly live. Choose this day which God you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. What about you and yours? Amen.